around the international perspective on all of the work that you do with your Guardian programs. Ed has been a leader on the international stage for decades, and I don't think he really needs any introduction. So if I could just ask Grand Chief Ed John to come to the podium, and let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mussy. I swear to God, I saw Dave Porter in that video. You were on a horse, okay. Edichu Mussy no tas ninja sanau os dil di neil dakel ne keo to be ni geo se undi kana batona dil ke Mussy zanin. Wanted to say thank you in my language. I heard a young man up here talking some Dene words. Language of mine is Dene, the Daket in the northern part of this province, south of the Casca Dene, Tsege Dene, Sestu Dene were in that general part in the geographic center, all the way down to the Chilcote end, they're Dene speaking as well, all the way to Navajo and Apache. In the southwest of the United States, they speak Dene as well. What I said was, we feel very good in our hearts that we are in the lands of our relatives from the coast here, and that it's an honor to be in their lands, to gather as we are. This year, 2019, is the International Year for Indigenous Languages. And in this province, every one of our languages, we have 8 language families and some 30 languages altogether. Every one of them is endangered. So I think it's really important that we make the connection between the land and our language, and what we need to do and what things we could be doing is teaching our young ones on the land about where they come from, firstly and foremost, in their own names, in their own Daket, Indian, indigenous names. And I'll tell you why I say that. Leah mentioned that I've been involved, here in the province. This is coming up my 30th year. I was invited to a meeting in the fall of 1989. One meeting, I was told. Late Chief Joe Mathias, late Chief George Watts, Bill Wilson invited me to a meeting. We're going to talk about bringing the province into the picture. I'm practicing law in Prince George as a criminal lawyer in and out courts every day. And so I'm very busy. But no, just one meeting. So I came here for the one meeting. So when I'm down here, I said, we're having another, they told me they're having another meeting in a bit. Can I come to that meeting? And then next thing you know, that was 30 years ago. So I've been doing that with young people, pulling that stunt as well. Where's that ginger? Young people that have that enormous talent and energy, how important it is and how precious they are to us. So here's, I was involved in the negotiations of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in Geneva over many years. And many people kind of poo-pooed the idea, wasn't really important, wasn't relevant, you know. And no one ever thought we could get it done. But it happened. We got it done. The declaration was adopted by the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva in 2006, 2005. After a long period of over 25 years, Imagine we spent 10 years arguing with the state representatives over one letter on the word people. Because the international standard talks about peoples with the S. And so over time, we got them to agree to add the letter S. Wendy, who's my wife, went with me one-to-one meeting, and she sat in the back and she said, "This is absolutely the most boring thing I've ever seen." We're arguing about the words "the" and "is" and where the comma should go, and it's. And but the thing is, we were getting substantive provisions in there, the right to self-determination. We take care of the land, it will always take care of us. It's so fundamental to all of our teachings. We heard that when we were children. If you take care of this land, it will take care of you. They teach us our responsibilities. Growing up, in all the teachings we've had, the stories, the legends, history, no one ever talked about the word rights. The only thing that they taught us was our responsibilities. But it presumes these rights exist in relation to the state authority, in relation to Canada, in our case, British Columbia. So I want to read only one provision in the Declaration. There are 46 articles in the Declaration, 24 preambular paragraphs. And very much every one of the provisions, every one of the articles would have a statement on the article in sub 1, and sub 2 would set out a state obligation to act. In this case, Article 25, I think it's pertinent to the thinking that goes on and the concept behind guardianship, the guardians of the land, guardians of the seas, guardians of our territory. We say, "Keo hogan line," in our language, those who take care of the land. Keo, territory. Hogan line, those who have responsibility and taking care of it. So it reads this, this is Article 25, Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual relationship with their traditionally owned or otherwise occupied and used lands, territories, waters, and coastal seas and other resources, and to uphold their responsibilities to future generations in this regard. I would ask you to memorize that, the guardians who are here, because it encapsulates that concept up here. If you take care of the land, it'll take care of you. What is this distinctive spiritual relationship? And what are these responsibilities that we have? And this is uniquely ours. There are not very many international instruments that use the word responsibilities. But since we've been involved with the climate change, for example, the climate change agreement in 2015 in Paris, Prime Minister got up in Paris and said, we have a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples. They've been taking care of their lands for thousands of years. He said that. It wasn't in his original speech because somehow we got a copy of his original speech. What we said to him before he went out to speak was, remember, Indigenous peoples have been taking care of our lands for thousands of years. And that worked its way into his speech by the time he got to the podium. And then I think it won him over in terms of the stewardship. I don't know what you want to call it. We don't. Kayawagan Line, I think, embodies the idea of stewardship. But more, it embodies the word responsibilities that we have how important that is. Why is it important? I'll give you just one simple example. You'll all have stories about this. We were out hunting one time with our uncle, our late uncle. Us young guys were carrying our guns and walking ahead in a trail, and behind us is my uncle. And of course, we're kind of breaking the branches. Finally, he said, "Stu's nephew." "What, uncle? Why are you breaking those branches?" I said, "Well, so it doesn't hit you. Make a path for you." He said, "No. If you want to break branches, there's lots of dead ones down there on the ground. Break those. That tree, that branch has a life, and it has a right to its life, and you should respect it." He's telling us in our language. And it was a really important lesson, because now we're starting to see what our relationship is to all life, not just to each other, but to life around us, whether it's the fish. Chief is in his big house, smokehouse, dancing, and he's wearing his headdress, and the salmon are drying on the rack, and one of these snags on his headdress. He grabs the salmon, throws it down on the ground in a bit of an angry fit. When he did that, everything, all of the salmon that were drying turned back to whole fish, went back into the water, and it started snowing that day, and it snowed until the territory over the roofs of the homes were covered, and people suffered very badly. Starvation. And what they tell us about that legend is really that we have responsibilities to protect that life. It gave its life to us so that it could nourish our bodies, and we ought to be thankful for it. Yet what happened? So these are the lessons. I heard the panel earlier talking about our laws. These are our laws. These are the teachings we have. These are what guide us in our relationship with each other, but our relationship with everything on the land, including the lands and waters. Tuhatsat water, they bless water. If there's something happening on the water and its use, we have a ceremony for that, blessing the water, to cleanse it. Same with a village. If there's something going on, we'll light a fire and we'll take balsam branches and bless and cleanse the community. Guardianship, stewardship, responsibilities. We all have it in each and every one of our nations. It's finding them and using them and grounding ourselves in these and sharing them with others. We shouldn't just listen to David Suzuki and his science. We should listen to him, but you know, when you listen to him, you'll bring in the teachings that we have that is learned from many of our nations and the importance of that. We shouldn't just listen to science. We should listen to science, but not just to science itself. Our own teachings, our own knowledge is as equally as important as anyone else, because now it encapsulates something completely different. It's a relationship-based thinking, that the relationship with everything that lives first and foremost, and that the responsibilities that we have to future generations. We've come through a terrible period where they've tried to destroy that through residential schools, for example. We've hung on to it. There's a resilience in us. Now we need to pass it on and rebuild as we rebuild our nations and rebuild our languages. We have a lot to work from. When we take our children and youth out onto the land, we have to teach them every mountain, every lake, every river, every bay, every point, the islands, the reefs. We call them underwater islands. We have names for them. We can't see them, but we know where they are. We use them for fishing. So we have names for all these places. What a really good way to start these young people on the language journey is just show them and talk to them about the land. So I'm going to leave it at that. My cousin and I, I'm going to finish with this one story. My late cousin, Harry Pierre, who was our chief for many years, in the fall time, we took his grandson and one of his grandnephews up the lake setting nets for whitefish and char. And as he's driving and I'm sitting in the front and the two 4-year-old, 3-year-old boys are sitting on either side of me and telling them about everything that I'm hoping that they'll hear me. So that one young boy is sitting over here to my right. I said, that island over there, that belongs to the family I mentioned, it belongs to us. And we fish in the fall time, we set nets for char. On the other side, there's a reef. But now there's a house there, you see it? Yeah, whose house? Well, it's non-Aboriginal people. Now they tell us we can't go on that island to fish anymore. And they're wrong. And he says, Eddie John. Kids call me Eddie John. They don't call me Ed or Edward, or it's always Eddie John. My first name and surname together. Eddie John, what? We should burn it down, eh? 4-year-old kid talking about that cabin owned by the non-Aboriginal people. So not really ready to burn anything down, mind you, but we can burn down colonialism and put it in the bins of history where it should really belong. We have no time or place for that. But we can stand on our teachings and our beliefs. Like it says up here, if you take care of the land, it'll take care of you. So really, thank you. I will be leaving shortly. We're sitting down with Canada and British Columbia because we're talking about policies, their policies, about our lands and our territories and resources and the inherent rights of our people to govern ourselves and our territories, and what these relationships should really look like between our nations and Crown governments. Leah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ed, and also thank you for your years of service to all of our First Nations, not just here in British Columbia, not just ones that are in the treaty process, but all Indigenous people across Canada. Next is our panel, Partners in Support of Indigenous Guardians Movement. So we have representatives from NGOs, industry, and foundations. Our moderator is the fabulous Shaunna Morgan-Seegers, Operations Manager for ILU. And Shaunna will call people up to the stage.
Great. Could I have the panelists for this session to come on up, please? You know who you are. And while they're moving up, I think I'll just get started by saying good afternoon to everyone. Wajé, Anamaki Gabidewi Tang Disnigas. My spirit name is the sound of rolling thunder. And my English name is Shaunna Morgan-Seegers, as you know, and I'm the Operations Manager for the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, and I'll be moderating the partnership panel this afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking the Coast Salish nations for they're allowing us on their traditional territory, and specifically the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, for allowing us to come here on their unceded traditional territory, Chimigwich. If we look at any of the long-standing Guardian initiatives in the room, or any of them across this great land, I imagine each one of them can point to the support of partners, whether they are from an environmental non-government organization, industry, or foundations. Partnership has long been an essential piece of Guardian's work, and we expect the same will be true moving forward. In this afternoon's panel, we're going to hear from partners in support of an Indigenous Guardian movement, and each panelist will provide a very brief 5-minute presentation describing their interest in supporting Guardian's initiatives. And after each has had a few minutes to speak, then we'll move to questions. So I'll ask you to please join me in giving our panelists a warm welcome. And I'll introduce each one of them as they come up. So our first presenter is Alison Woodley, who is the Strategic Advisor for the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society and has been with the organization for nearly 2 decades. She has worked with and supported Indigenous nations in the Northwest Territories to expand and create Indigenous protected areas. Alison was a member of the National Advisory Panel for the Pathway to Canada's Target 1, an experience she describes as profoundly moving and hopeful, because of how the panel, through the guidance of the elders and embracing Indigenous ceremony and ethical space, brought their hearts and minds to the challenge of how to better protect the land. Allison lives just north of Ottawa, Ontario. Allison.
Thank you. Does this work? Yeah. Thanks so much, Shaunna. I just want to start by saying, it sounds very loud. I just want to start by saying how very honored I am to be invited to attend this gathering and to speak. It is a very profound honor for me, and I thank you very much for welcoming me to do that. I'd also like to thank the Coastal First Nations for hosting this gathering, in particular the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and Chief Frank Brown and your family for the amazing ceremonial opening, and Elder Dave Crushane for very moving ceremonies to get our work going in a good way and keep us going on that path. After a day and a half, my heart is very full, and my head is very full, and I have 5 minutes, so that's a bit daunting to find something to say that would be of value to this very moving and inspirational gathering. Dave Crushane said yesterday that people of heart will be the future for humanity. And I think that is a very simple truth and very clear truth and an opportunity for hope for the future. I joined the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, or CPAWS, 18 years ago. And I joined because they had a clear mission and mandate to protect the land and waters in order to sustain all life on Earth. And that matched and aligned with my values and my heart. For the first decade that I worked with CPAWS, I had the great privilege of supporting the work in the NWT by our NWT chapter, which was supporting Indigenous-led conservation initiatives. So I had the chance to go north and sit in community meetings, and I was at the Decho Assembly way back in 2003 when Herb Norwegian was first elected Grand Chief, and it's actually been great to connect with some of the folks I worked with back then here. But this was really an inspiring kind of start to my time with CPAWS, and hopefully I brought the teachings and the learnings forward in the work. CPAWS is a nationwide conservation charity. We have 13 regional chapters across the country who lead the work on the ground with partners to support conservation. And we also have a national office in Ottawa where we lead the work on federal kind of policy for conservation. CPAWS has worked in partnership with Indigenous governments and communities for a long time. My first day on the job in 2001, I was writing a letter in support of the Decho vision for protecting the South Nahanni watershed. And that partnership lasted for almost a decade, supporting the Decho vision for expanding Nahanni National Park. And there are many partnerships across the country, from the Peel River watershed, where CPAWS Yukon with 4 First Nations went arm in arm to the Supreme Court of Canada and successfully defended the land use plan that had been created under a constitutionally protected land claim agreement, to CPAWS BC, who's working with the Casca, Dene, and in northern Alberta, our chapter is working with Mikisew Cree, with Melody and her team to protect Wood Buffalo National Park, and on, right across the country to Newfoundland. I want to share kind of the policy framework that has emerged that we do this work under. In 2011, the CPAWS Board of Directors passed a resolution formalizing that as an organization, we would adopt the principles in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to govern our own practices. And the resolution recognizes that CPAWS will only succeed in our mission by continuing to broaden and strengthen our collaboration and partnerships and support for the work of Indigenous peoples. Our partnerships are varied, depending on what communities need, and often at the heart of them, the Guardians program is a part of these initiatives. We work together on Indigenous protected areas, Indigenous-led land use planning, etc. Often the work that we do involves rallying the support of non-Indigenous peoples. There are many non-Indigenous peoples across this country who are passionate, who feel passionately about protecting the land, about protecting nature, and about supporting Indigenous people's work to move to a better path forward. And I think that there is power there, a potential power. I think there is an opportunity to rally the support of Canadians in a way that allows space, is respectful, and happens at the right moment to be helpful in terms of pushing Crown governments, encouraging Crown governments, and building support. And I also think there's an opportunity, and I wonder, this is kind of an idea I've been thinking about over the last couple of days, is the Guardians likely may provide an opportunity for cross-cultural learning. And once it gets off the ground, this could be a very powerful way to bring more non-Indigenous Canadians into the fold as allies, as supporters, with a greater understanding of the amazing work that is being done through the Guardians program, through Protecting the Land initiatives across the country. So I'll pass it along. I'll leave it at that.
Miigwech. Thank you, Allison. So we're going to next move to Claire Hutton. Claire works for Nature United, and she is a community conservation leadership advisor. She has worked with Indigenous communities on the coast of BC and across Canada for over a decade to support the authority of Indigenous peoples to steward their lands and waters. Claire oversees Nature United's Indigenous stewardship strategy and leads Nature United's work to support Indigenous guardians across the country. Prior to joining Nature United, she was the coordinator for the Coastal Guardian Watchman Network with the Coastal First Nation Great Bear Initiative. Claire is based in Victoria, British Columbia. Claire.
Good afternoon, everybody. For some strange reason, I'm feeling a bit nervous sitting with a microphone in my hand. Can I stand up? It's
Come on
so
over.
strange. I'm just going to move over. Thank you. But then I have your watch ticking in front of me. That will make me even more nervous. Yeah, I think I'm nervous because this is such a big room, and I have a lot of respect for everybody in this room. So take a deep breath and just start by, of course, thanking Shaunna for having us up here for this session, but also for the very warm welcome from the Coast Salish peoples yesterday morning, and for our welcome this morning from Dave Christian, the elder. And just really wanted to kind of lift my hands up to the people who have brought all of us together, because I know it's a lot of effort and work and patience and persistence to pull something like this off. And also thanks to all of the people that are here and the people who couldn't be here, because I know there's a lot of people out there doing this work and supporting this work who aren't with us in the room tonight. So before I talk about my organization and the work that we're involved with, I just wanted to share kind of a bit of a story that has kind of keeps coming to me as I've been in this room for the last couple days. And that is in 2005, I was part of organizing just a meeting, really, with some folks who work on the ground in communities at the time that didn't have Guardian programs on the North and Central Coast. And that meeting really sparked the start of the Coastal Guardian Watchman Network, and that was in 2005. And I don't think any of us in that room at that time could have guessed that in 2019, there would be like 400 people in a room talking about starting or continuing to evolve a national network in support of Indigenous Guardian programs. So I just kind of want to note and reflect on what people have been saying, but this wave of focus and effort and attention on this incredibly important work and how that has grown, has swelled over the last 10 or 15 years. I know it's always been there, but in this facing way. So again, I just want to kind of offer that reflection and also kind of my congratulations to everybody who is part of that. So since 2005, I have been working in various capacities to support Indigenous Guardian programs, and kind of fascinating for me is that kind of wherever I go, including that first meeting in 2005 that led to the Guardian Watchman Network, it feels like there's three things that come up time and time again when I sit with people, and we sit with people and talk about their nation's work and what they want to do. And first, and none of these will come as a surprise to anyone in this room, but I thought I'd just note them. But first is that how important this work is, right? That goes without saying. And it is hard work. It's hard work. And I see that in that room, and I hear it in the voices. And people know, obviously, that this is the way that authority, Indigenous authority over people's territories manifests itself. So that's consistent, not a surprise to anybody here. The second thing is that I hear from people, once they start talking about Guardian programs and Guardian's work, they're like, hey, but what's happening over there? Hey, do you know what those guys are doing? So there's always this curiosity and this inquiry around what other people are doing. And also to know that people want to know that they're not alone. They're not out alone out there trying to build this Guardian program, figure out this stuff, figure out how to get funding, et cetera, et cetera. And the last thing is that people really want to learn from each other. So I think people intuitively want to uplift each other and want to support each other, and they want to know what each other's doing and how to learn from each other. So those are kind of the three things that I see kind of consistently. A bit more about the organization that I work for. So the organization I work for is called Nature United. We recently changed our name from TNC Canada to Nature United. What? Very quickly then. So we are a conservation organization, a Canadian conservation organization, and the majority of our work is around working in partnership with Indigenous communities to support their authority around managing their lands and waters. And often, one of the ways the focus of that is around supporting the growth and expansion of Indigenous Guardian programs. And I say we work in partnership, and that's what we are actually asked to talk about. And so I just wanted to mention a couple things that from Nature United's perspective we feel like are really critical in terms of working in partnership. And so first off, it means showing up and listening, like listening really carefully. And then next, it means following the lead of the Indigenous peoples and nations that we work with. And then it looks like figuring out together how we, as Nature United, as an ally, can add value and provide support and resources to the nations that we work with. And then I think the last part is being in it for the long haul, that relationships and relationship building and maintaining relationships is over time, and that's a really important aspect. And so some of the work that we do around supporting Indigenous Guardians, quickly, I just want to talk about three things that'll go in like a nanosecond. But the first is around creating platforms for sharing and connecting around the nuts and bolts of Indigenous Guardians work. And so everybody should have one of these on your table. And if you haven't seen the Indigenous Guardians Toolkit, please check it out. It's an incredible repository of the experience of nations across Canada who are building Guardian programs, and it's a place to kind of learn and share and connect around the nitty-gritty of building a Guardian program. We also provide opportunities for people to come together and learn from each other. And so one of the things that we have is something called an Indigenous Guardian Visit Indigenous Guardian Community Visit Funding. So it's just a small pot of funds where you from your nation can go visit someone else from another nation and work together to share and learn and uplift each other around your Guardian programs. So you can find information about that on the Toolkit website. The next deadline is the end of May. And last but not least, the Nature United staff, we have people working directly in the geographies where we work. We provide direct kind of facilitation and planning support to partners that we work with who are looking for that. And so in conclusion, moving forward, we're really excited to listen and learn and figure out how we can continue to be a partner in the evolving national network. And thank you for your time.
And our next presenter is Tara Shea. She's the Senior Director for Sustainability and Aboriginal Affairs for the Mining Association of Canada. Tara works with members, stakeholders, and government decision makers on policy issues relating to Indigenous engagement, wildlife, and biodiversity conservation. Tara is responsible for the management of the Mining Association of Canada's Towards Sustainable Mining initiative, and she is an active member of the Species at Risk Advisory Committee and is dedicated to working on species at risk and protected areas related to issues. Thank you. Oh, okay.
But I won't go over, I promise.
Okay. Thanks, Tara.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Shaunna. And I'll just start by echoing my colleagues' comments and my appreciation for being welcome into the territory and to this gathering in general. I feel very privileged to have been here today, and I was really touched by the panel before lunch and just hearing from personal experiences of how this program has actually changed people's lives. So I was really inspired by that. So thank you for the introduction. I'm pretty sure that was just the bio from my company's website, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I do and then our support for the Guardians program. So as mentioned, I manage our Towards Sustainable Mining initiative, which is a program that all of our mining companies participate in. It's mandatory. It's about performance at the mine site level, both environmental and social. There are two aspects that I think might be of interest to this group. We have an Aboriginal and community outreach protocol that requires meaningful engagement on the ground. And then also we have a biodiversity conservation management protocol. And within that protocol, there's a specific aspect for companies to partner with local conservation groups, communities of interest, and Indigenous peoples on their biodiversity plans and making sure that those are collaborative. As mentioned, I also work on policy related to biodiversity. I was also on the national advisory panel with Allison, and as mentioned in her bio, I learned a lot about ethical space, and through the ceremony, it helped me grow personally, for sure. And then most recently, I've taken on responsibility for our Indigenous affairs work. We're working on this project right now with the Mining Industry Human Resource Council to act on Call to Action 92 from the TRC report, specifically number 3, where the call for corporate Canada to educate the workforce. So we're developing a standard for all of our mining companies. And basically, what is the basic system you have to have in place to educate your workforce? And then how do you measure whether what you're implementing is effective? And how do you know if you're delivering change within your organization? So I'm really, really excited about that work too. And for those of you who've had an opportunity to work with us, or rather we've had an opportunity to work with you, we've really tried to prioritize Indigenous inclusion over the past few decades. And of course, it's evident through the performance in that Towards Sustainable Mining initiative that I mentioned, but it's also evident through, we're the largest private sector employer of Indigenous peoples in Canada, and we're also a major customer. There are over 455 formal agreements between companies and communities and companies and nations. And most of them, anyways, the modern ones have provisions for environmental monitoring. But But the reality is that such project-specific arrangements, even in combination with the best commitments, cannot provide on their own the breadth of monitoring or even to build the capacity needed to make sure things are done properly. And I think that the Guardians movement, the Guardians program is helping to fill that gap. I was president at our Environment Committee meeting a couple of years ago when Valerie presented the concept and proposal for a network of Guardians in Canada. And I remember that our members, which are mostly environmental manager type people, there was a lot of enthusiasm. In the coffee break, they were talking about their experience with the Indigenous Rangers in Australia, and also the experience that some of our members have had in Labrador with the Innu Nations Guardians program, where they were involved in the project level monitoring and getting things ready. And I think even to now, they have full access to the site, and they're really the liaison between the community and the company, relaying back any concerns or input. I'll just leave you with this. The individuals responsible for environmental programs at our mine sites, in general, they want to do what's best for the environment. And there's a growing understanding that in order to get things right, we need to draw on the expertise of traditional knowledge. The Indigenous Guardians Network offers a way for stronger relationships at the local level, as well as a better understanding of ecological health and the actions required to mitigate negative impacts and deliver positive outcomes for nature. I'm hopeful that, especially after learning about individuals' experience from that panel this morning, and also just the conversations I've had with individuals here, that there will be long-term support, not just from us, but in the terms of funding that will keep this going. And I think it's a really positive thing, and I'm so inspired by the work you all are doing. Thank you.
Great, so next we have Michael Scott. He's a senior advisor with the Resources Legacy Fund, and in that role, he's overseen the Resources Legacy Fund in the Boreal conservation in Canada, and participated in the implementation of the Innovative Fund, the Open Rivers Fund, which was created to remove dams and other river barriers in the western United States, and supported the development of innovative approaches to conservation in the US and beyond. Prior to his tenure at the Resources Legacy Fund, Michael was the program officer for the William and Flora Hewlett-Packard Foundation for 8 years, and he lives in Bozeman, Montana. Michael. Nobody wants to stay in their seats.
Claire said it, President. So, Shaunna, you promoted me. You made me a program officer both for the Hewlett and Packard Foundations. I feel honored. Yes, thank you. So it's just a real privilege to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, Shaunna and Val. And it's just the energy that's in this room is just really spectacular, and how much progress has been made over the last year since the last gathering in Ottawa from last year that I had also the honor to be with you at. So Val and Shaunna asked me to really talk about, share with you kind of the foundation point of view. Why are funders interested in helping support the work of Guardians? And so I'm going to just cover three things briefly. Why are they interested? What can we all do to leverage that interest? And three, how is it that we can turn that interest into more permanent sources of funding? So the first thing to understand is that the funders, by and large, that are interested in conservation in Canada come at it from a protection point of view. They are interested in protecting hectares. And they are inspired by three different things. They are inspired by the Convention on Biological Diversity and Canada's commitment to protecting 17% of its land area. They are inspired by the fact that the Canadian government put $1.3 billion on the table, unique to the world, for conservation. And they are inspired by the leadership in this room. And perhaps I should have put it in reverse order, that they are inspired by the leadership in this room. And the three of those things together, from a foundation point of view, are unique to the world. Not just North America, but they're unique to the world. And the other thing to recognize is that if you're a conservation funder, if you're a Hewlett Foundation or a Moore Foundation or anybody else out there, or a Metcalf Foundation, there are very few places in the world to go to achieve your outcomes, to help achieve conservation on the ground. You're certainly not going to go to the United States these days, and you're not going to go to a lot of other countries of the world. So Canada's having a moment, so the funders they see money to leverage, which is really important to funders because they like to get leverage out of their investments. They see deadlines. Funders are not open-ended people. They don't provide, foundations don't provide money and say, okay, here's 10 or 15 or 20 years worth of money. They like to see something getting done in a 3 to 5 year period of time and things being brought home. So they see that. The other thing that they see, which is also unique to Canada, is they see the precedent that you all are setting in this room. They're seeing a national movement of people who are interested in linking the protection of their homelands with guardians to manage those areas. Also unique in the world. There's only one other place really that has imagined it at the scale of Canada, and that's Australia. So it's a place for funders to come. But funders are fickle. You know, their attention span won't last long. So how do you take advantage of their interest in Canada at this point? First and foremost, as I mentioned at the beginning, funders come at this from a protection agenda. They come at it from an IPCA perspective. So tightly linking the establishment of IPCAs, it's been talked about before in the room, to a guardians program is a mechanism for educating funders about how the two things work hand in glove together and why they should be supporting both of them. They don't naturally come to the guardians side of the equation. They naturally come to the conservation side of the equation. So there's an opportunity here to educate them on that. Secondly, I know that probably doesn't go down well with some people, that there's an expectation that funders should understand the importance of the relationship of people to the land and the necessity of creating a guardians program. And when I was at the Hewlett Foundation, it took me a number of years to understand that. Recognize that foundations are like anything else. People turn over, priorities change, and you have to meet those foundations where they are, bring them along, educate them, use the moment to move forward. The third thing I would mention in terms of taking advantage of funders' interest at this point is to use the moment in time, this recognition that these funders have, that there's an opportunity to set a precedent in Canada as a leverage to get investments in Canada now. As a way of establishing the precedent that funders and countries will take to China in 2020 for the next meeting of the Convention on Biological Diversity. Because if we do our work well, what will happen is Canada and Indigenous people will go to the CBD meeting and they will say there needs to be a new ethical form of conservation in this world based on Indigenous-led work, and that should be embedded in the Convention on Biological Diversity, because virtually all the remaining wildland left. Thank you, Dave. Virtually all the wildland left in the world is occupied by Indigenous people, and that's not a coincidence. It's because the Indigenous folks have kept it that way. So let's do that. Let's take advantage of that. And how do we turn that into permanence? Well, you all are doing your work here to demonstrate that guardians are viable, that IPCAs, IPAs are viable. We've got a 5-year window with the Canadian government with $1.3 billion. Let's turn it into a permanent fund, not just a 5-year fund, and let's link it to permanent funding for guardians as well. And let's ask funders to help us all do that. That's the opportunity, and that's the opportunity both within Canada and I think internationally as well. And I would look forward to a delegation of people from this room going to Beijing in 2020 and making that case to the countries of the world and the funders that are going to be sitting there. Thank you.
And finally, but not least, we have Steve Kallick. He's the founder and senior strategist and director of the International Boreal Conservation Campaign, which has been a two-decade-long collaboration between multiple non-government organizations and foundations working together for the conservation and sustainable development of the North American boreal forests. The International Boreal Conservation Campaign is the major supporter of the Indigenous Leadership Initiative and funds many Indigenous-led conservation efforts, including the Indigenous Guardians programs being undertaken by First Nations across Canada. He hails from Seattle, Washington. Steve?
Thank you, Shaunna. Thanks, everybody. As everyone has said, it's an honor to be here. Thank you so much for your patience and for sitting through these long presentations and paying such close attention. We hope we can live up to your expectations and impart some valuable wisdom. Everybody hear me okay? This is, usually I'm too loud. People are trying to get me to be quieter, so. Okay. You'll be sorry. I have a background in environmental and Indigenous law, and strangely enough, those are two separate streams. When I had the privilege when I was in law school of working for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, which is a stewardship organization, a guardians program that was started by the Columbia River Indian tribes in late 1970s. So many of the things that we've talked about today are very similar programs that started organically, started out of necessity and out of an assertion of Indigenous sovereignty. In that case, it was treaty fishing rights. And that organization's done a tremendous job over the years managing the fisheries on the Columbia River. It's strange those two streams are separate. They really should not be. And I think today we see where they're converging. The journey that my organization and International Boreal Conservation Campaign or the Boreal Campaign or whatever you want to call it really isn't an organization. We don't have a building, we don't have membership. We are really just a network of people who see the world in similar ways and who collaborate to get things done. It started with the Pew Charitable Trusts, and I mentioned that just because Michael's talked about the funders. As an Alaskan, I was recruited into the Pew Charitable Trust many years ago, almost 20 years, well, no more than 20 years ago. And they handed me a file and said, we're worried about the extinction crisis. We're worried about all the terrible things that are happening around the world to the environment. Do something about it. And we looked around the world and we saw that many people were trying to protect the tropical forests. Many people were trying to save different parts of the oceans. Very few people in the world were focused on the North American boreal forests, and particularly in Canada. And we thought, well, this, be a pretty straightforward situation. We know Canada, we understand Canada, and we were remarkably ignorant and blundered into, as many people do, blundered into a situation that we didn't understand. We tried. We looked at maps. We looked at the political map of Canada, and we believed it was accurate. We believed that Manitoba owned Manitoba, and that these things were just the way that conventionally most environmental groups and foundations saw the world. And we thought early in our time working with different organizations in Canada, the traditional environmental organizations, that really just needed to give them funding and everything would work out. Thankfully, that era didn't last very long. Kathy Wilkinson, who you all know, who I work with, called me up one day and said, really what we should be doing is we should be giving funding to First Nations for their own land management planning and for their own stewardship. And it seemed a little bit surprising because it's not something traditionally foundations were doing. But I said, well, okay, let's do that. From a few early investments that we made with the Decho, with the Casca, various other nations, the Innu, we realized that the true leaders and that the true experts in the field were the Indigenous nations. And from that knowledge, our perspective changed. And we were aided along the way by particularly the Indigenous Leadership Initiative senior advisors, who many times took us aside and corrected us and helped us learn. But eventually, as this 20 years of learning progressed, we changed our entire approach. And for the most part now, We provide support for First Nations leadership, stewardship, guardians programs, experts, lawyers when you need lawyers, and put ourselves in service of the Indigenous leaders of Canada, who are the protectors of the land. In closing, let me just leave 3 thoughts with you. First of all, I think all of us who've had the privilege of working with you over these years will thank you for your patience, for your efforts to educate us, for your forgiveness when we've made mistakes, and for encouraging us and really being true partners. Secondly, I think you should expect this of all your NGO partners and all your foundation partners. But don't just expect them to be smart. Help educate us and help us learn what you know, because we can be great allies, we can be great supporters, and we need to build a movement together. And finally, you should just know we're 100% behind what you're doing. We're thrilled about the development of the Guardians programs. We're thrilled about Indigenous protected areas. We want to help you build strong nations and strong, healthy communities. Thank you very much for your work.
So do we have time for a few questions? We do? Okay, great. So are there any questions from the floor? I'm going to forego my question. I think we'll just go straight to the floor because I know we'll probably want to try to get back on schedule. If I could have a mic over here. And if there's any other questions out there too, I only have one question so far over here, and another question at the far back, whoever has the second mic.
Good afternoon, Wayne Caboni, Chief Wetlands of Catholic Assembly, by way of Wikwemikong, Ontario. I'm a Potawatomi person. I'm honored to see a couple of my mentors here, Ovid being one and Ethel being another one. And I was recently taught a lesson, now that I've progressively aged and I've been in this political forum for over 30 years. I was told a couple of weeks ago by an elder at a meeting in Ottawa that with a world full of problems, we need to become the solution. And I like somebody talking about CBD because I'm really worried about the AG amendment around traditional knowledge and IP. That's a big thing for me around traditional knowledge. Ovid and I had a little bit of conversation about that. But I'm keen to see that organizations, Aboriginal organizations, for as long as I've been around, and I was a fly on the wall in 1983 in Sheridan, Toronto, during the constitutional conversation. And we always talk about core funding. The one thing that people need to understand about core funding, it's governed by director generals. It's governed by ADMs in a poker game when they're developing notional budgets. So what we want to do, if we can do A-based funding for the military to protect our country, why can't we do and develop a strategy to get A-based funding to protect our lands? If we look at that saying, if we take care of the land will take care of us. We need to educate people that come into our territories, into our land around, we need to start protecting our land. We've been doing it for thousands and thousands of years. And I was at a language initiative and they went to core funding. People, core funding is dictated by bureaucrats. A funding is dictated by the cabinet. If you're going to progressively make change, that's what you need. We have foundations here that will help us build the case. We have lots of people that have knowledge on how to do this across this country. Like I say, I was a fly on the wall in 1983. I observed Meech, I observed Charlottetown and Kelowna. Times now have changed, guys. We can't go after core funding because when we do a good job, the core funding gets taken away. We've seen that in economic development. We've seen that in pathways. In 1994, we spent $574 million on employment and training. And in 2014, I was appalled that we were celebrating that we were spending $140 million on employment and training. $400 million less 20 years later, and we're celebrating. We did a good job, and it got taken away. The plus-minus scenario needs to end. I think we need to start building a strategy about protecting our land, because only we know how to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, over here.
Hi there, my name is Elodie Button. I'm asking this on behalf of a community member. Thank you so much for your presentations. I was wondering if any of you are aware of or would be willing to offer capacity building workshops or training around applying for grants, proposal writing, building relationships with funders. I think that your presentation, Michael, I believe it was, really met a thirst in this room. But I'm wondering if any of you are aware of maybe more work that could be offered to communities, particularly those who are creating new programs and are just kind of coming into this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I was just negotiating with my partner in crime here. That is something that the Boreal campaign, something that when we as funders, as a funder, that we help support through the Boreal campaign, it is core to the mission of ILI, and actually Val may be able to speak to it better. There are resources out there to do it. We could talk offline about that, okay?
Yeah, and I'll just add a quick note that CPAWS folks across the country are also working with some communities as well to support the kind of proposal writing around the challenge grants. We're partners on a whole lot of challenge grants across the country, so we could also chat. And I would also like to note that, I should have said this before, our interim executive director of CPAWS is Alison is also in the room, and so you can chat to either of us. She's waving over here.
Great. And I'll just give the floor to our senior advisor, Miles Richardson, for a very brief comment.
Okay, I just have to say this, and I know I get another chance to speak later, so I will be brief. And I just leaned over to Ovid and said, as senior advisors to the ILI, I've had a cold, I was saying, our work's almost done. That panel up here just before this one was awesome, of the Guardians initiatives across the country. And Michael and Steve, I want to thank you for what you just said. Every time you do something wrong or say something wrong, I'm down your throat. So I want to stand up and say when you say something right, I think what both of you said is bang on. That supporting nationhood, supporting our own people, in stewardship of our territories and building our own capacity and building our own plans in our own way is the quickest way that society is going to get to those conservation goals. And I just take my hat off to you. That was very good.
See, Miles, even little dogs can learn.
Absolutely. So, in the rest of the NGO community, just take the guide. We're not there yet, though. We still got a little bit of work to do. But in supporting nations around this room, they're going to come up with all the plans we need to do this. And, I think step by step with the NGO community, the governments, we're going to get there. Thank you.
How
And to the gentleman who talked about the A-based funding and how that should work, at the last panel today is about going forward, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we need to do in terms of financing your Guardians programs.
Shaunna, could I add one?
Go ahead.
Can you all hear me? I think what Miles said, thank you for the compliment, but what he said about the challenge round, the government so far, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but last time I checked was they got over $1 billion worth of applications and challenge round applications, and they've gotten dozens of proposals from First Nations all across this country. That's power. That linking those communities together, those nations together, and demonstrating the demand and the need for both the creation of new protected areas and the Guardians to support them is a huge step in this country. And it's the first time that, at least that I'm aware of, that it has been demonstrated at that level and with that visibility. And my suggestion to you all is don't lose the moment. Take the network that's created, talk to all of those people who've put proposals in, knit them together through a Guardians program or through some other network, and use that to get the A-based funding that the gentleman over here was speaking to. That's the only way that you're going to translate that kind of desire and thirst for nationhood into action.
Thank you. Thank you. I see that there's a desire for one more question. I'm looking to our... One more? Yes, one short question.
Yeah, thanks. Herb Norwegian, DHO Guardian Program. Not so much a question, but just more of a statement and a word of thanks to all the people that are up there, Steve and all you guys, Mike, for all the work that you've put into this. We've been in touch, we've talked, I don't know how many times on this here, but it's good work. And all of you that are here, to talk about and to listen about what the Guardian program is all about. It's really important work that we're taking on. And as I said yesterday, it's, we're here. We finally arrived at this moment where we need to be telling the world what the situation is out there. Now, when we talk about the Guardian program, I think the Guardian program is something that should have happened a long time ago. But many of us have done it. I mean, we're harvesters, we're trappers, we're out there, we're fishermen, and that's what we do. Naturally, that's our job. Now we have a generation of people that are coming forward and willing to take it one step further. But what I see is the Guardian, as we speak about it here today and for the last few days, is we see it as a body that actually protects, defends. And what we do is we do everything we can to make sure that the land is intact. But there's also the other side of the Guardian responsibility, and that's to tell the world what it is that you know, what you hear that's happening around us. The very thing, though, the world as it unfolds, there's some pretty dangerous stuff that's happening out there. And so the other part of the Guardian program, the Guardian responsibility, is your job is to be the messenger. You have to go out there, not just to defend. You need to go out there and you need to talk about it. You need to explain to people what the situations are. And you're the frontline people. You're the guys that are out there. You see what's happening. You see the water bugs, you see the fish, you see the water changing. These are the kinds of things that are happening. So along with defending and protecting the land, you need to go out there and you're the messengers. You need to go out there. And what you've heard for the last few days, that's incredible information. Even the stuff that David Suzuki was talking about. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you need to take. That's information, that's the real facts that we're dealing with. And so again, I just want to thank the panel for giving us some great insight and their continuous support for this big program, and all of you for being part of this. And I hope that our journey doesn't end here, that we just continue to march forward. Masicho. Thanks, guys.
Masi. And please, thank you to the panel as well for their presentations today. Thank you. And before you leave?
We'd like to say thank you to the panel for your information and participation in the meeting. We really appreciate it. So one more round of applause.